Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer and welcome to my channel. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about the books that I've been reading this week. And I've had a little bit of a pause. Thank you for people who sent some really lovely messages. Essentially, life stuff is happening and there are a few things that sort of took my attention away for a bit. Still kind of are, still very much ongoing, but we shall see. And a big part of that as well was last week, apart from everything kind of being on fire, I also just hadn't been able to read at all. And for people who've been following for a while, you will know that that's quite strange, really. It was very weird to me that I think at one point I had a whole week where all I read was one short story. And even then, my eyes were sort of a bit glazed over trying to read them. So I'm a little bit back and very happy for that. So let's get talking a little bit about some of the books I've been reading this week. So first up, we have Monstrilio by Gerardo, Sámano, Córdova. And this is just such a delight of a book. I say delight, it's also quite dark and difficult. But I'd seen a couple of people talking about how much they loved this book and really raving about it. And particularly a book from a small indie press, that all captured my attention. And Monstrilio is a story of essentially a family going through grief, and the way that they deal with it is quite unique, and this book takes quite a few odd turns, essentially. The main odd turn being that the parents take a piece of their dead child's lung. So their child dies at about 11, I think they are, and they take a piece of his lung, and there's a sort of mystical fairy tale thing going on around it with, you know, these folklore stories of what you should do with the dead and how you should process that. And what they do is they take this little piece of lung, and people around them warn them that this is maybe not the best idea, and they do so, and they start to feed it. And this is where the problems become bigger, because it grows and grows until it essentially takes the form of what otherwise is a fairly ordinary teenage boy. And so the book essentially follows how these parents try to grieve the son that they've lost, but also the son that is now, well, the part of his lung that is now sentient and is killing local animals to feed and is their son but also not their son, and all these other things. And so I think this book actually, as much as it's funny and absurd, also really delves into the depths of grief and loss and how people try to process that, because essentially the family take different approaches. Some of them say, well, we want to continue Santiago's life as much as we can through this little monster. For other parts of the family, they say, well, no, we need to just grieve. We need to let him go and mourn that. And so this book takes on all these other forms, and I think is just so clever and interesting for it, as well as just being really quite funny and absurd at the same time. Next up, a book that really helped me get back into reading a bit over the last week, because I just love the way she writes. Elif Shafak with There Are Rivers in the Sky. And side point, I don't want to make this the earworm that now goes through everyone's mind when they read this book or hear about this book. I can't hear the title of this book without thinking of the I think, is it Elvis Presley? The song like, there's a devil in the skies. But in my mind, I can only hear, there are rivers in the sky. That's entirely how the whole thing goes for me. So that, I'll leave that with you. That's now... apologies. But essentially this book is a really beautiful tale. I love the way Elif Shafak writes, because she does that thing that I think is so precious and so rare, which it feels like you are sat at your grandparents' feet, maybe around a fire, as they tell you a story. She has that very oral tradition type of tale down, and it's something that only a few writers I think I've read can really nail, and I think particularly with the beautiful details in this story, I think it comes through really poignantly. So Elif Shafak writes in this book about several different characters, but they cluster around similar identities and ideas. So one is a young woman in London in pretty much the current day, I think 2018 or thereabouts. Another is a young man who is looking over runes and sort of old tablets that have carvings in it, and he's trying to decode the language from kind of ancient times, Mesopotamian times. to find what's there, and in doing so finds the tale of Gilgamesh, among many other things. And it takes, this story darts around a bit of olden day Turkey and modern day London and even olden day London and a few other places, but to do so bringing in all of these different parts of the sort of tale in a really beautiful way, I think. So one part is focusing on this idea of rivers being constantly underneath us. Water, as the title would suggest of this book, appears quite regularly, whether that's a character musing about rivers existing kind of culverted underneath the cities we live in, whether that's the gift of water and the preciousness of nature and life and many other things, whether that's sewage and various other things, or whether it's, you know, the flow of trade through rivers and all that kind of stuff. And so the book is kind of obsessed with rivers in a way that I found equally quite interesting, because although it does feel a bit lectury at times, I think that those lectures go on to do something really important later in the book. And I think Elif Shafak pulls it off because she's just so talented at that storytelling aspect of just really making you feel like all of these things are poignant and we need to give them focus, and there's a beauty and a power behind all of them as well. So yeah, really enjoyed this. I see why people are raving about it, and I think yet another reason to read more Elif Shafak. And last but not least, a book that also luckily ticks the box for Annuary as part of Ben Reads Good's challenge. And this is Annie Ernaux and Marc Marie with The Use of Photography, translated by Alison L. Strayer. And this is a really interesting book in many ways. It's quite a short one, as many Annie Ernaux books are, but it takes a slightly different focus to some of her other books. And like I mentioned, it also has Marc Marie as part of it, who is a lover of Annie Ernaux's. And so what we see in this book is something quite fun, I think, a sort of peek behind the curtains, with Annie Ernaux and Marc taking it in turns to comment on photos that they have both taken. And these photographs are of very private moments between them. Essentially, they buy a camera and they take pictures of the aftermath of their night, which is typically one of them has been cooking and then they have sex. That's basically basically what happens. So the aftermath pictures are almost always sort of bits of, you know, plates on the side or whatever, and just loads of clothes all over the ground. And they use those to comment on their relationship, on what was happening at those times, their wider states of well-being and everything else. So in one, for example, there is some underwear that's underneath a pair of Doc Martens, and both Annie Ernaux and Marc Marie use that as a commentary on what looks at first like a very poignant commentary around gender, but also the way that they, you know, Annie Ernaux talks about when she got the shoes and all these other things, and everything else kind of comes into this portrait. And actually later it gets incredibly touching because Annie Ernaux starts going through various issues around breast cancer, and so the photos become this interesting memory of a time that she was still able to feel really sexual and loved and touched, whilst also feeling a weird disjunct with her body as well because of everything that was happening and the treatment and various other things. And so it's this kind of almost bedroom moments in a really touching and vulnerable way, but it being Annie Ernaux, it has bits around sex and comments on the wider world and all these other wider socio-political things going on as well. And so I found this really quite fascinating. The pictures are in this book, apart from one, the first picture, which we just have described to us because it's basically made clear that there's some junk going on in the picture. But everything else is just these sort of scapes, sort of bedroom scapes, I don't even know if that's a word, just pictures of the aftermath of a night of lovemaking. And it's such an Annie Ernaux way of doing this, but it was still utterly captivating, I found, because it just has her insights. We have her insights versus Marc's insights, and then we also have this really poignant part towards the end as well. So yeah, I really thought this was very special as well. So those are the books I've been reading this week. I'm hoping to slowly get back to doing my weekly reads again, life is sort of picking back up. But yeah, just please do bear with me that there may be the odd Wednesday or Sunday video or whatever that doesn't happen. I'm just sort of, life is doing its thing right now. So, but yeah, thank you everybody for your lovely messages. I hope you've had a good start to 2025 and are doing lots of fun reading as well. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.